Hello there, and welcome back to our Orlando time-lapse series. In today's episode, we will finally start on the opposing side of the actual Main Street to build the counterpart of the Emporium building, the Main Street Confectionery. So let's dive straight into it today. So as you see, I'm back now. We had quite a long break here on this channel. I went away for 3 weeks with my vacation, and after that, when I got back home, I was really out of this whole thing, and I also needed another week, so you could say a full month to get back into recording. But luckily we have quite a lot of footage that is already pre-recorded. Everything that you see just now is from mid-June, so I only have to do the talking here. And I feel like we really have to talk a lot today. There was quite a bunch of things happening in the last weeks. So maybe we start today's episode off with some talking about Frontier and their live stream they made during that time. I was quite a bit surprised that they featured there a new little game mode that was called Challenge. They showed a little bit of footage where they quickly loaded a park and where you on the left side get like a little quest log or goal that you have to fulfill in order to get much more money. And I feel like that is the right way, that you have there, as I said in the last episode, a little bit of that roguelike element, that every run that you do or every park that you are building has something unique and special about it, and that the development of this park, how it expands and grows, is very dynamic. Depending on which quest or which goals you get, it influences the construction and design of this park. If it's now actually like that, and where it makes the game a lot more challenging or ups the replayability of the game, we don't know in the end. But what we can state here is that the broadband of how you play this game gets bigger in a way. You not only have the classic sandbox or the career mode, you now get this third option that is kinda a mix between them. And so I believe at least that Frontier goes here into the right direction. I was halfway afraid that they lose themselves too much into making scenery packs alone. I mean, on the one side, for me as a puristic builder here, this would be the greatest thing, that they only produce now cosmetic items in the park that I can use for that. But this would be just too selfish. And when you look on the broad majority of players who plays this game, they are just not puristic builders, and that's why I think they shouldn't let the gameplay side of the game down, and that's exactly what they're not doing right now. They are creating now another game mode and expanding the range of how you can play this game, and I feel like that's the right way then. When you think about sandbox games, it's always a little bit of a curse. On one side you have the full range, the full broadband of creativity and all those elements to create from, but on the opposing side you have to kinda get up with a plan on yourself. I mean, you have to create there something, so you have to already know what you are creating, or at least a vision of what you want to create there. So it's on one side a blessing that you have all those options, but you can very well say that it's also a curse in a way. You always have to make the first step in order to achieve something. Nothing will be automatically gained here. You always have to make the first step to achieve something. At least regarding to this project. I mean, the vision is very clear here, what we are going to do here, but it's of course completely up to me on how much I drive this switch of maybe creating another building today or tomorrow. And depending on my mood and my living situation, I have to adjust to that. I mean, it's a very complicated topic, I feel like. But that's at the same time why I feel like sandbox games are so very interesting. It's just not a game like, let's pick any game out there, maybe for the sake of it, Battlefield 6 right now. You play it, you already get all the instructions how you play it of all those prequels before that. so it's pretty clear what you do in this game. But in this game, in Planet Coaster, those boundaries or those helping limitations that are in place are completely removed in a way when you play Sandbox. And as I said, this can be very great if you are very creative, but if you are much more of this player type that wants a little bit of a challenge, but at the same time creating your own little park, it can be sometimes very hard to come up with something and to not get overwhelmed with all those possibilities that you can do in this game. I mean, when we pick another Sandbox game, for instance City Skylines, there you have the same burden of your own decision making. You have to make something in order to get something after it. And so of course you can play this game, as most certainly 99% of players do, in creating just a very functional city that doesn't have any resemblance to any real city out there. And if that's working for you and you have fun in doing that, then that's absolutely fun. And that's then the purpose of this game. But again, if you want to create a little bit something more realistic, you have to just get much more motivation and effort into that. You have to inform yourself on how to create a realistic city, for example, and how you are creating all those roads in the way they should be constructed and that they are following their own specific logic. And so at least if you don't have their specific goal or something there that leads you along your own very creative journey, then it can be at some times a very lonely experience. And where you think to yourself, oh, do I really have now the nerves and the motivation in creating another area to the city, for example? Or in Planet Coaster terms, do I really have now the inspiration in creating another scenery theme next to my Western theme? You know, it can be very tough at sometimes to even continue on something. And so in that regard, it makes sense, of course, that you now have there another space that is much more restricted in a way, and where you just can play on and you don't have to think too much about all those possibilities that you have in theory. I feel it's much more interesting if the opposite is happening, that you only have one or two options there. Let's say you start your park only with 2 different food stalls and 1 flat ride. Then it's much harder to make a successful park and to progress with that. And that's what I like to see, that you have there a very restricted start and you work yourself upwards. At least so far what I saw in the live stream was that it's just like another Sandbox map where you can in before set your specific difficulty with all those values. You have most certainly very much rides to work with, and then you get just some little quests along the way. And I mean, that's surely great, but where's the real challenge in that? I feel like if you really want to make a challenge here for players, you have to make that so challenging that it's almost impossible to play the game. Only then I feel like it kinda drags people in, because they really want now to beat the game. If it's like a walk in the park, what's the point in playing that? If it says challenge mode, you really have to make it challenging, I feel like. It doesn't make any sense at all if it's like a little bit challenging. You really have to go full ham here, I feel like. We probably could go here the whole episode on this topic, but let's get back to what they also said in this live stream. What I noticed there was just a little bit of a hint of that they are working on another free update and perhaps even on a DLC or something where they really work up towards, and where we might get our first DLC that is not only a DLC but a full-stretched expansion pack. So after I watched this live stream, I noticed that the reactions or the broad opinions of people are very mixed about this little live stream they made. On one side, people said it was too short and they really didn't give enough informations about the continuation of this game. On the opposing side, people said they of course need a little break now. I mean, we are human beings and we make holidays, of course, throughout the year. And so they are maybe in a period right now where they are less active as they usually are. And where I at least can understand that, since I self-made a little vacation here. But apart from that, I just feel like a quick break here is just the right thing. We can't expect, or shouldn't at least, a free update every month. I mean, that's just not a healthy and great thing. They should much more invest time and effort in the quality of those updates and keep the quantity of them pretty low. I feel like one update every 3 or 4 months is much better when those updates really changing also something. It doesn't make any sense if you just make like 10 changes to the game and call that a complete update. I mean, so far all those monthly updates, in context to the state of the game, it was reasonable to produce them. But I feel like from now on you have to go a very different road. You have to set the quality over the quantity, I feel like. All those expansion packs or any thematic area that you might include in the future, you just need time and effort to develop them. You can't do that in 1 month. I mean, that's just not realistic. I mean, it's Frontier, it's not EA or Rockstar Games. And I mean that positive, because otherwise we never would see this game being developed, I feel like. If they would have the same studio size as them, they would never come up with such a smart and innovative game like Planet Coaster. We would probably see something like Roller Coaster Tycoon World, which was absolutely god-awful, oh my, or something like SimCity, which was completely butchered from EA. To this day, I don't get why those big studios, you know, they have infinite money and they have so many people there that work there and where they could create any game they want. But because the size of them is so huge, the limitation of what you create there or the risk involved into that is so high that you can't have any innovative part in that. I mean, all those big AAA games that there are and that are repeating as sequels and sequels, so something like FIFA or Battlefield or Call of Duty, all those things, they are just so repetitive. There is barely anything new in them, but still, just because they are so huge and also so huge in their marketing, those games get sold in some way. And I mean, for many people out there that just want to relax after a hard day's work, that's maybe their game and they like it, and that's fine. But I always seek for a very unique thing about a game that really has a core game feature that is so unique that makes this game outstand from the market. Mostly you see it in indie titles, but I just feel like in the AAA sector you barely see anything groundbreaking new. So for example, in Planet Coaster, why it's so unique I feel like, is that you have a very innovative system of how you place scenery in this game. I never saw it before in any other game. In all games prior to that I can think of, you build all your stuff in a orthogonal manner. So like in Anno or in Roller Coaster Tycoon 1 and 2. So you have a grid-based building system. But now to combine that with the integration of this gizmo that has a strong resemblance to any 3D software out there, it's just brilliant, I feel like. And it works so great because it also works there. And so I can still remember when I first played Planet Coaster 1 in 2016. The first time I saw that you actually have a gizmo in this game, I absolutely was blown away by that. Not by the coasters or the scenery or anything else in this game. It was purely by that. And so to now finally come back to this live stream that they made and to conclude now this topic, I feel like we can expect to see here much more very soon. I'm sure they are just in the middle of developing all of those things for the next months. And I just hope that they don't force it too much, that they don't want too much too quickly, because I could assume that after all those monthly free updates where they worked primarily on their own new features, but barely on any thematic area on their own, so they only brought back stuff from the prequel, it could be kinda hard to get a sense or a workflow going how to create your very own thematic area. I mean, you have to make concepts and turning that into a 3D model. I could kinda see that very complicated, or you really have there to need a vision and a strong decision where you will end up at the end. And so to properly end this now, I feel like we can very confidently look for the coming months that they come up with new updates. What I would also like to point out here, maybe we should just let them do their job. I mean, I could imagine that it's a little bit frustrating for them that people just want features and features and features and they are never happy in a way. And once you brought out another feature that they requested, they want another feature and another. So it's an endless process and cycle. So from that perspective, you can't never make it perfect to everybody out there. They have to go their own path of development of this game, and we should just let them do that. We of course can comment that at some times and discuss that because it's pretty interesting, I feel like. But we shouldn't get lost into this false expectation level. What I mean by that is that I sometimes lose myself in so many little things and critics about this game that I completely lose the sense for its actual true beauty of its building system and all those things that make the game so unique. I completely lose that, and I'm only so stubbornly focused on all those small bits that annoy me that I completely overlook that, and that's so annoying. And so sometimes whenever you hear me criticize the game here, please keep in mind that I absolutely adore it and love it. It's just like in everyday relationship, there are up and downs, and sometimes you can't stand it and sometimes you just can't live without it. But having said all of those things now, I believe it's time to come back now to the actual building today. So we are building today on the confectionery building. It's a corner building and it's the opposite of the Emporium building on the left side. And so in the terms of importance to this park, it's very high up there, since in a way it's also a very big reference point for the entire right side of the Main Street. Therefore, I used also on this building blueprints to make sure that we exactly have the same measurements on this building. So in short, to cover a little bit about that, the size of this building is roughly about 9 to 10 meters in height, and the flooring that you see on the backlot behind the building is around 8 to 9 meters. And so for me, this height indicator of this backlot flooring, you could say, it's extremely important because it reappears constantly at every building there is. I mean, every building that you see right next to this confectionery here, it has an attachment on the very top of it, where the roof is and also where it has the connection to this flooring. And therefore you can already have there a great height reference when layouting and guessing the right proportion of it. Especially while mentioning proportion, this was the key on this building right here. You saw me how I went now in creating this facade. I started at the top floor and worked myself now downwards. And that is because this window facade that you see defines the whole building. When you have the distance or the, let's say, segmentation of this facade where you have one window, then you have a column, then you have another window, and then another column. When you have that in the proper proportion, everything else that you see will come naturally. Once you have this logic in place, you just keep flowing and flowing, and you don't really have to think about anything. You're just executing. And that's something that I talked also in previous episodes, that you have to find the building logic whenever you are doing recreations. I mean, earlier on the railroad station or pretty much any building that we have constructed so far, there was at least one building defining logic on the facade of it. Whenever you have created that, everything else will become much easier after it. So as I said, on this building, it was mostly about this arrangement of how those windows work at the front of the facade. Another thing that came a little bit later on and that you are just see me right now doing is this roofing or this little colonnade that goes in the forefront of the building. At first I was a little bit clueless how to create it now with actual pieces in the game, but since we now have this 5% art piece change, it's pretty doable. And so when you take a look on the reference image right now, you see of course those pine cones that alternating between those panels. And I already, when constructing that, had in mind that later on you have this curvature around the building. And therefore I kept it very modular so that I could later on very easily rotate it slightly to get a clean and smooth curvature around it. This part you will not see today with the curvature and all that, since I split up now this episode, you could say, or the construction of this building into 2 separate episodes, because the footage would be just too long and we need here 1.5 hours only for this building. I mean, without time-lapse, it's roughly 10 to 15 hours. When I say that, it doesn't really felt like it was that long on this building. I mean, whenever I'm building, I don't know if time flies by, but it just doesn't feel like that much of time. But keeping in mind that this building is of course a very important one next to the Emporium building, it makes sense that it of course takes a little bit more time than usually. So coming back to what you see right now in the footage, I'm just layouting or positioning those bricks that you see on the facade of it. All over the building you have those bricks happening, and they are very iconic or distinct, or they give something unique about this building, I feel like. And so, since that was important, I also made sure that the counting or the amount of them is exactly like in reality. So when you count from below to up, you have exactly 20 rows, and every second row is slightly offset. You of course also notice that in reality they are in different colors. This will come later on. Right now I'm just about positioning them in the right space. I have to say, when I constructed them here and all the time looking on the reference images, it's a little bit confusing at sometimes to really see this pattern now in all angles on this building. You really had to search for specific reference images that made a shot of this building from very far away. Because when you are standing very close to the building, you have the colonnade in the way and you can't see that upper part, for example, above the colonnade, how that's continued. And so I really had to dig there a little bit. Luckily it's a very well documented building in the Magic Kingdom, but I could imagine later on when we are maybe creating some super minor building in the very fast corner of this park, might be a little bit tricky to recreate that. And so something on this building, I mean, we don't have to talk around it. One of the most difficult parts are those awnings on it. I mean, right here they are very square shaped, but when we later in the next episode go upwards, since the windows have a finishing on the top where they complete into this 6-sided geometric form, this transpires then also in those awnings. And you will see of course that those awnings have 3 sides, and where you really have to figure out a solution with all those layers of this clothing, which in our case is primarily built out of art pieces. And so this will become our main issue in the next episode. So far those square ones, they were pretty straightforward. I just could copy them from the brick building that we built on the left side of the Emporium building. I'm a little bit splitted on those awnings because they just eat on the piece count, of course. And I believe one awning that I used here on this building, it's roughly 150 pieces or something like that. No, I believe they are even more than that. But it's just the thing, it's of course something that reappears constantly throughout this main street. And at the same time, keeping in mind that they disappear if you move farther than 50 meters, then there's even an argument that you just remove them incomplete. I mean, right now on this confectionery, those awnings, I believe, are very iconic and they are part of this architecture almost. So maybe on this building, we don't remove it here. If you later imagine that you have there so many buildings in the park that have awnings, and suddenly you see them all pop into your eyes and out, I mean, that's just annoying, I believe. And our number one priority here is to make the immersion that this is a realistic theme park. But for now, I just let them in the park, and maybe in the future, if you play this park, you could just remove it then anyways, if you like. We will see. So right now I'm building on the lower part of this building, where you have a little bit of that facade coming out, and you have there a very distinct blue color. I really love that color. Gives a great pop into your eyes when you look on it. And so as I was creating this lower floor here, those windows that you just see here, where you have nothing in them, so only those glass sheets, I thought to myself, wow, I feel like this would look so great if you now have the interior in place and you would have like a little light in there or some shelves there, and people would go now through this entrance and you have there a super nice interior. So having said that, the current plan for me, how I advance now in the park, is to first finish this area right here. Then the next part would be where we finish off the railroad station with the proper interior, just because right now it looks ugly and I just want it finished so that you can actually also then make a first test with people in the park. And I just want to see now this railroad station then with proper people rocking along those stairs, and finally use also those invisible paths. I just want to get those things tested. And after that's done, then we can properly start our way right to the heart of this main street. When I remember myself back to the first episode of this series, I believe I stated that I could imagine myself in 1 year from then on to be finished with the main street and to have at least started with another area of the park. As I'm seeing right now the progress on it, and also how much time left is there until this park right now celebrates its first anniversary, then I might have to correct myself here that we might not finish this main street in this year. I mean, what is certain right now is that the acceleration or the speed on how we progressing through this main street, it gets much faster than before, just because we building right now on the actual street where all those buildings are just right next to each other. So we don't have to do much layouting here like on all those previous buildings like the railroad station or the city hall or the fire station, where those buildings were standing on their own and where you had to invest a lot of time even before starting on building. All that layouting took time, and right here we only have to measure roughly the size of the building. We have our height references and then we just get going. As I'm saying this, it kind of reminds me to the actual construction dates of the Magic Kingdom. The construction began in 1967 and the park opened in October of 1971. And so we have here roughly 4 to 5 years where we can hopefully finish this park. If it takes a little bit longer than that, I wouldn't be surprised. As you know, the Anaheim project took in its entirety 7 to 8 years, but again, there were many pauses in between and you can't really make a fair comparison there. And where it's mostly just the time between 2017 and 19 where I was most active in the park. So I don't really know. I hope that I stay very active in this park, at least so far in the last half year or 8 months since we started building on this park. We always had there a steady progression on this park. I believe it doesn't really matter how far we actually are in the percentage of this park. The only thing that matters here is that we have a constant progression in some form. The thing I'm noticing is whenever I record those videos, that the time and effort that going into them is much higher than the actual construction time I have in the game itself. And so I really have to get used to that, and it's not always that easy to find time. I mean, I have also to work right beside that in my normal day job. Then I have to care for my home and all of those things that go right beside that you of course don't see. But the pure fact that we are already in the 29th episode so far, it kinda tells me that it works regardless of what is happening around me. And that's kinda relieving to know that I don't have to change my lifestyle completely in any way in order to keep this series up. But maybe let's get back to our build right now. As you see, I almost finished now this lower part, and I found those flower elements. They also worked here pretty great for this little ornament that you see on those columns there. And so in a second you will see that I move over to the colonnade. And one thing that appeared right now to me is that you have of course a very interesting, let's say, building orientation. You have here 3 sides. You have the left side, you have the right side, and on the 45-degree angled side you have only 3 windows there. So they emphasize the facade by removing some of the core features on it. And that's pretty brilliant, I think. And I'm telling you this right now because what I'm building right now, it's connected to that. All the time you have those 3 facades happening, you also have like this little ornamented emphasis happening. So like a little landmark that already tells people from far away, okay, here, this is most certainly another entrance to the building. Or it kinda signals, here is the midpoint of this building. So the difficult part here is how to create now this ornamented structure. In the game I used a piston for that, so that I had the option of symmetry, which is absolutely helpful whenever you are trying to create something like that. And so you can already see the result of it in real time. It helps tremendously when modeling those things out. Back in Blend Coaster 1, for example, we would have to do the same process all the time. So we would always copy the left side to the right side when we make a change to see the result after it. And so, by the way, coming back to one of those rumors that pistons or things that are within a piston would slow down the game, so far I really didn't notice anything in that regard. I mean, it's always a little bit hard to see if there is any effect of that, just because we are already at such a high piece count. But since the whole thing is not animated in any way, it's only attached to the piston, I just hope that it doesn't really draw away any of the performance. And at least right now, since you have now the benefit of this symmetry mode, it would be foolish to not use that, at least for some more complicated builds. But so far I'm very pleased how this ornamental structure turned out. It's not always that easy to get something good looking in such a small scale. If this structure would be double the size, then it would be no problem. We could do it very detailed. But since we have to care about the scale of it, it's again the issue. And especially you can see it on things that actually should be round, where you just lack the pieces here. I mean, if there would be some art shape that would have different anglements of a curvature, then you could do something like this. But since we only have those very simple ones, you can't really go here so detailed. Having said that, it's a really minute detail, and it's also so small that later on when you have the full building there and everything blends together, you most certainly will not see that anymore if you don't search for that. However, at this stage we are working ourselves now up to the very top floor of this building. I very much like this concept here that the facade that you see on the first floor, this whole thing gets dragged up to the top floor and it makes a circle. or in this case a hexagonal shape at the very top, which defines the outer boundaries of those windows. And especially in combination later on with the Victorian tilted roofs, it's just a beautiful Victorian styled aesthetic, I feel like. And when you compare it to the Emporium building, it's a lot different building style, but in some way also it's very similar. You can see there that this whole architecture style, I mean, it's not only the Victorian period, but all those different ones, they all mix and match in this park, in this Main Street. Although it's the same architecture style, you have there so many different, let's say, expression methods of how you arrange it or how you lay out that, in which colors and in which scales, that you have endless possibilities how to create such a building. And I am sure that you could build the entirety of this Main Street in 10 or 20 different variations. And that's kinda the fascination of a Main Street. You can rearrange those buildings constantly, and every time you get a slightly different result that has its own unique qualities. And overall it's the same concept. It's the same street you walk towards something, and it serves as this great entrance area to your park. When you take a look on the one that you have in Paris, it's very similar to Orlando, but you also have there very unique things that are not here. For example, you have there the tram station on the very right side of the main hub. So you have different locations for all those individual buildings. Especially in Paris, since I was there, I believe 2 times, the most recognizable thing, or the thing that came really in my mind and that stick with me, was when you arrive there, you don't really see there any railroad station in front of the park, because there is this huge hotel directly in front of it. And so once you pass that, suddenly the railroad station comes in your viewing axis. So you can say that there's a lot different dramaturgy that happens in all of those 3 parks. But all of them have in common that they feature a Victorian-styled Main Street that transpires the same atmosphere and the same vibe that is attached to this era. And that's the great thing that keeps those parks connected in a way. When you break down those parks, or why especially those Disney theme parks are so successful in the end, I mean, on one side it's for sure the story and the whole thing about that, but on the other side it's the simplicity, I think. It's very easy to understand its layout. When you take a look on any park we have here, you have a Main Street, you have a main hub, then you have the castle, then on the right side you have your space area, on the left side you have your western area or your adventure area, and if you go beyond the castle you have your Fantasyland. And all of those things are super easy to understand even as a child. And that's why I think it sticks to us, since most of us as a child we went there and already understood a little bit at least what those parks are about. That's also why I think you can't make any comparison to any other theme park out there, just because you don't have this childhood memory that is attached to that whole thing. I mean, surely you also have maybe childhood memories to other parks. So for me it's the Europa Park in Rust here in Germany, but it's a complete different memory than I had when I went to the Disneyland Paris. And I don't feel like you can rank them here, they are just so very different. Everything around them, the whole concept and the presentation or how you arrive there is completely different. But for instance, if you take now the Europa Park, it's just a little bit different for me to remember that, because it's so complex. There are so many different areas and there's not that, let's say, easy to understand overhanging layout like in the Disney park. And therefore those memories that I had from Paris, I just can remember them much more visible in front of me. I'm not entirely sure if it's now only that easy to understand layout I mean, it's most certainly also many different things and the whole thing about Disney and their storytelling, but at least part of it is, I feel like, about their layout. And that's why I think when you start a new park here in Planet Coaster, if you have a very easy and understandable layout so that you can already figure them out in some way if you think yourself into the mind of a child, then the park is working greatly. And I really don't believe that you need 10 or 20 different themed areas in your park. I believe if you have there 3 or 4 that really are top notch and they inhibit all of those qualities about them, then my belief is that the park will just look naturally realistic. And the main reason for that is just simply because you took now the same principle that works in real life, in all those real-world parks. I mean, 99% of people that play this game or your park in the future, most certainly they went in the real world into a real theme park. And so they already know a little bit about how that looks and what to expect. And so of course a park that has now 30 areas in it with over 50 rides, although that might be really cool, it's just not really realistic. And if you go for any fantasy park out there and realism is none of your business, I mean, absolutely fine. But if you want a little bit of that realism vibe or ask yourself why those theme parks, how they actually work in real life, you just have to look on their layout. And that's actually what I'm trying to say here. It's like an endless pool of inspiration. So if you may be starting on your park or you're just working on it, just look up parks and how they dealt with specific areas, how you move through them and how those buildings are arranged in some form. Having said all those things, I think it's enough for now. We are close to the end of this episode and there are still some things I like to mention here. So some of those things I noticed was that in the last episode I used the term precasted on those asphalt slabs that you see on the whole Main Street throughout, not only on the street itself but also on the sidewalk. I have to correct myself here that precasting is of course the wrong term here. I mean, it would be insane that they would actually precast all those big and heavy slabs of concrete and transport them here. I don't know what has influenced me in believing that at the time, but it's of course not precasted, it's casted directly right here in the park. The thing with the deviation, so that you have those square ones and you all the time have like those nuts in between that divide those slabs from each other, that's of course there to help with those cracks I mentioned. So when it gets really hot and you have those cracks happening, since you have those nuts there, the surface tension is not that high than if you have just a plain sheet of asphalt there. So again, I just wanted to correct myself here, since people mentioned that under the last video. And one other thing I like to mention here, that I decided now for this episode and also the next one, since we are working only on this one building here, that I might only cover one cinematic once we really have there something to show off. I mean, it doesn't really make sense all the time to make a cinematic, since it really takes up time and also a little bit of effort. I mean, you have to make it a little bit epic, or I mean, you have to give it some story there, and to come up with that and all of those other things, each episode, I think it's really tedious. Although I like this process very much and I love watching those cinematics myself, but I feel like it only makes sense in a reasonable amount when we really have there something new in the park that is not only like one lantern or something, but actually where you see suddenly a whole building front that is completely new. I mean, after all, it should be something special, and when we do it too often, I'm afraid that it becomes too normal for those videos. And for me, especially those videos from Planet Coaster 2, I mean, Anaheim, the whole park is released, so I can't really surprise you anymore, except maybe from those POVs that are coming in the future. But right here in In this park, it's not like that. And so with every video that comes out, you have this surprising factor that comes to play. Whenever you might see it in your video feed popping up, I just hope that it gave you a little bit of excitement when you see it. And if that's so, I'm obviously over the moon. So again, in the next episode that follows up here, we will have no cinematic and we will just start quickly directly into building again. But the episode after that will surely cover another cinematic in it. So as I covered those things now, there is not that much to talk about anymore, except maybe this roof here. I mean, you saw me now for minutes on end figuring out a solution to it. It's mostly just playing with those art shapes and trying to get the right proportion in it, and sometimes you can see me recycle those things up to 5 or 6 times. When you see the reference image, it's of course not always that accurate, and where it's much more seek for what looks good in this game. Especially on those profiles where you have those trim areas, it becomes often the problem that you just can't recreate that. Those things in reality are so finely detailed, you just can't do that in Planet Coaster. And so you have to find another way how to create that with the same feeling attached to it. It's much more that than to actually accurately recreate it. And so you always have to find the perfect sweet spot between accuracy and what looks good in the game. Right here at the very top of this building, as I'm creating this fencing, I'm not that happy how it's turned out, and the look of this fence is just too heavy, I believe. Surely this method that you just pick one element here and you spin that thing and copy it around 100 times in different angles to create one super ornamented fencing, it's surely great, but the whole thing is just way too heavy. And when you see it on the reference image, it's way finer and more nimble, that I can see myself very likely change it in the future. So with everything being said, I would like to conclude today's episode. You saw today the main concept of how we started the recreation of this building. In the next episode, as I said, no cinematic, but we will finish this building up and then we have it in its full glory here in the park. And so as always, if you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe, like or comment, become a member on this channel, join our Discord server, watch my other videos about Anaheim or Orlando, and thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.